When We Disagree is a show about arguments, how we have them, why we have them, and their impact on our relationships and ourselves. Discussions about democracy often sound abstract, but they shape how we experience political debates, news, and even disagreements in our personal lives. To get a handle on the concept, let's look at one of the most influential accounts of the public sphere in a democratic society. Jürgen Habermas, a German philosopher, wrote meaningfully about the flow of information and ideas in developing democracies throughout his career, and is most well known for his 1962 book, The Structural Transformation of the Public Sphere. Habermas described the public sphere as a space where individuals come together to freely discuss social issues, form public opinions without the direct influence of government or corporate power. It's a kind of middle ground between private life and our formal voting participation in the political system. Historically, Habermas traced the origins of the public sphere to 18th century European coffee houses, salons, and pamphlet culture. In these spaces, citizens, often wealthy men at the time, of course, would gather to debate political issues and critique those in power. The printing press further amplified this kind of critical public discourse, circulating ideas and arguments widely. However, Habermas also argued that this ideal public sphere deteriorated over time as mass media, economic interests, and political manipulation came to dominate communication. But the concept of the public sphere isn't confined to history or philosophy or institutions. It also helps us understand how we negotiate disagreements in everyday life. Think about how a group chat can become a mini public sphere, especially when friends or family members debate a divisive topic. Maybe a friend shares a controversial story, and others chime in with different points of view, linking to different articles and sharing experiences. Ideally, the conversation allows people to weigh evidence, question assumptions, and refine their views. But just like the historical public sphere, these discussions can break down when misinformation spreads, voices are shut out, or people argue in bad faith. Ultimately, understanding the public sphere isn't just about analyzing governments or media or corporations. It's also about noticing how we engage in dialogue and recognizes the spaces where public opinion can take shape. Whether it's in the comments section of a news article or a town hall or a heated family debate, the principles of the public sphere, or the ideal public sphere, can always be at play. I'm Michael Lee, Professor of Communication and Director of the Civility Initiative at the College of Charleston. Our guest today on When We Disagree is Michael Covington. Michael is the Managing Director of Speedwell Group, a government relations firm in Columbia, South Carolina. He grew up in Orangeburg County on the mossy banks of the South Edisto River. Michael, tell us an argument story.
When I finished the College of Charleston, I had studied a lot of behavioral sciences and this sort of thing, and I took a job with the State Human Affairs Commission working community relations work, which was trying to resolve community issues, mostly based on racial discrimination or unequal services, highway projects that were plowing through minority neighborhoods and that sort of thing. And so I worked with a gentleman named Earl Brown, and he had gone through a lot of management training in his day. And one of his favorite management tools was something called the confrontation meeting, which was part of a book called, I think the name of the book was Organizational Transitions by Richard Beckhard. And the main lesson I learned from that, the confrontation meeting, was that if you're going to solve a problem, the first thing you need to do is confront the problem, identify the problem. And so we would occasionally get involved in things, like I said, maybe a highway project was going through. There was one in particular where all of the right-of-way was supposed to come equal parts on each side, but the local government said, no, we want you to take all the right-of-way on the other side of the road and only widen on that side and don't touch anybody's property on this side. Well, it became a racial issue in that town because we found out that the mayor's sister lived on the side where they didn't want to give up any right-of-way, and there was
figure.
Yeah, there was a black businessman on the other side who was famous for his sausage and local groceries and things of that nature. So we had to get folks together on that.
Take us through what a confrontation meeting looks like. In other words,
Okay.
what's the format?
That's really a management tool, okay? And Earl kind of applied it to community meetings. And so I'll continue with the story about the highway widening.
Yeah.
So we went down there. Earl kind of famously had a great sense of humor, and he said, Michael, you might want to back the car in to park for this meeting because we may have to make a fast escape. And so it was going to be held in the courthouse, in the courtroom.
Okay.
We walked into the courtroom, and all of the white people were sitting on one side, and all the black people were sitting on the other side. And Earl says, Michael, see if we can find another room.
Right.
So I found another smaller room, and Earl said, folks, we're going to have to move down to this other room because they're going to clean the courthouse room tonight. And by the time we got them all in that other room, it was all mixed up, black and white all together. And so we had a couple speakers to identify what do you see the problem here? And let's identify what is the issue we're dealing with. And from there, I don't know. There's some magic involved. There's some management involved.
Sure.
There's a little bit of cajoling. And when I worked at the Human Affairs Commission, we were given 3 powers: conference, conciliation, and persuasion. So we didn't have a lot to work with there, but it worked out. And just by getting everybody to see the other side's position.
You have several success stories. This road widening issue is one of them, but lots of successful confrontation meetings. Is that right?
Well, I wouldn't say that is that the confrontation meeting. That's just one tool in the toolbox.
Okay, take us through the others.
When I was at the College of Charleston, Bill Keeling, a professor in anthropology, had a course called Culture Change, and it was all about how culture changes. And so that's like group psychology almost, how groups evolve. And he assigned us to read a book, which is still on my bookshelf today. It's called Innovation, the Basis of Cultural Change by H.G. Barnett. I think it was written back in the, 60s or 70s, but it's still relevant today. And basically, it's a very detailed, difficult read, to be honest with you.
And it's an academic book?
And and it was very academically written. And so, but the basic thing you learn from that book is that if you want to get someone to come around to a new position, to get rid of their paradigms and their biases or false beliefs that they may have and open their minds, it's best not to start at ground zero. It's best to find out what they already believe. This almost sounds Machiavellian, but you find what they already believe, and then you innovate upon that rather than trying to invent. You innovate and gradually bring them around to seeing the big picture. Now,
that's one of the ancient rhetorical lessons from folks like Socrates, Aristotle, etc., is that the limits of persuasion are the limits of the audience's current beliefs.
Yeah. That's well said. Well, I didn't know Socrates. Was he a friend of yours?
Knew him well. He's a hell of a bowler.
Oh, really? So the big issue, when I left the Human Affairs Commission, I went to work for the Associated General Contractors, the AGC. And these are people who are big contractors, people who build roads, people who build skyscrapers, people who put in water and sewer plants, water and sewer lines, not your home builders. These are big commercial and industrial contractors. And the highway and bridge contractors and a lot of the engineers that design highways and bridges had become very frustrated in the early 90s, where they had supported a gas tax increase in 1987, and it was only 3 cents per gallon, and the vast majority of that money ended up being spent on hiring more highway patrolmen, expanding the motor vehicle division. By the time they got through with it, they could not do what was intended, and they were very frustrated by this. And it was because politics was guiding the ship. And so in 1993, we formed a committee to look at how the highway department, is what we called it then, how it's structured. And we came out with a very detailed report, and I'm proud to say I wrote the report, but I had a lot of input. And that report recommended taking the old highway department, which included the highway patrol, transport police, motor vehicle division, DMV, and it included all of your highways and mass transit. Everything was under one umbrella.
Okay.
And we recommended dividing that agency up. And former College of Charleston president Glenn McConnell took it under his wing and pushed it through. And there were a lot of people that questioned it. Are you really sure you want to give up these driver's license fees and all this and let it go to the general fund? And the reason we said yes was because we wanted the Highway Commission to focus on highways and not be worrying about, I want a highway patrol radio in my car, or I want to get my registration to my car, taken care of very quickly or something. Yeah. So we got that done.
Yeah. And this is a politically thorny issue, as was the first example of the confrontation meetings. And so you have a wide career to look back on to say how you focused on conflict negotiation, on de-escalation, on peaceful coexistence, on just getting stuff done in state government, and then on the basic act of persuasion. As you look back on it, what are some of those important lessons to you? You already mentioned one, which is focus on what the audience currently believes, but what are some other ones?
I hear presentations sometimes, or I read articles that I go, wow, that's exactly how I think. I like this. And, 2 months ago, I was at a presentation by Dr. John Medina with the University of Washington. And he was talking about separating fact from bias. And he made some really interesting points. For example, that your ears and your eyes take in millions of bits of information, but your brain can only process a certain amount. Uh-huh. And so one thing that I've really learned is keep it simple. You've got to keep it simple and try to identify what the person's predisposition is, what their bias is. Bias is not necessarily a bad word, by the way. It just means that you have a built-in, you hear a buzzword, you see something, and it makes you automatically categorize this into that preconceived notion that you have. Right. And so he divided it up into 2 or 3 different things. One was illusory truth effect, which is like, if somebody has heard something repeated to them enough times, whether it's true or not, they're going to believe it. Mm-hmm. The other thing was exposure effect. You become comfortable with things that are familiar. And so if it's familiar, if it's unfamiliar, you're going to not believe it. And that leads to the third thing, and that is there's a negativity bias, which means when you have a response to hearing some new information, most people are automatically skeptical. So I've learned that all of these things, he wrapped it up into such a beautiful presentation back in August, but I have really learned that you've got to pay attention to don't talk at people, talk with them, listen to what they're saying, listen where they're coming from, and then try to kind of use that to your advantage to get your point across.
You've come to this a few times, and I was going to ask this question at the beginning when you were talking about the confrontation meetings and identifying the problem, which is really saying, what is the fact? What are the facts of these cases, and how are they inconvenient for some of us? And here again, we return to the basic question of fact, facticity, factuality, separating fact from fiction, separating fact from bias. Mm-hmm. It's a deceptively simple question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. How do you know that something's a fact?
You must have been listening to PBS day before yesterday.
Never once.
Okay. What do we really know is fact? That is a philosophical question that we'll be asking for eons, but I think that something that can be quantifiably proven. I think something that, in my opinion, it should be based on the scientific method. And for those of you listening who don't know what the scientific method is, it means you will observe, you will observe again, and you will observe again until you see a distinct pattern, and then you come to a conclusion. It's kind of like the difference between deductive reasoning and inductive reasoning. And one thing that confounds the hell out of me, and that is inductive reasoning.
Mm-hmm.
The great example, and I think it might have been Socrates that said, the example of this is you walk into a forest and you see a redbird and you go, wow, there's nothing but redbirds in this forest. Well, you haven't taken a few more steps and realized there are bluebirds, there are ducks, there are geese, there are whatever.
Sure.
And so you come to a conclusion based on usually predetermined biases that based on the first thing you see. Politicians are kind of bad about that. I've learned is they'll take one example of something that terrible happened in a community and say, this is what these people are doing.
Yeah.
And it turns out that it was a one-off.
That's right. That's right.
So I think the main thing is to pay attention to who you're talking with, open up to them, let them air exactly, and keep asking the way you're doing me right now. Ask questions and dig in.
You have a lot of faith after we live in a very cynical culture, and we live in a culture that's very cynical about what can really be gained by having difficult conversations and attempting to persuade people who are really dug into their beliefs. In other words, we have a culture that seems to be moving apart from one another as quickly as possible and refusing to do the kinds of work that you've spent quite some time doing. Mm-hmm. You're sitting here and you have, and I'll admit this to be a kind of enchanting belief in the power of intergroup dialogue and persuasion. Is that a fair characterization of how you feel?
Traditionally, yeah. I do see it becoming more and more difficult to work in that kind of world.
Yeah.
But
you're also sitting here talking about induction and deduction and redbirds and hasty generalizations, which is what that was, and so forth, and hopeful that if more people could learn the scientific method, if more people could learn reproducible evidence, if more people could listen more effectively, then perhaps we would have better public reasoning.
Yeah, it seems that more and more, and I don't know what the what's causing this, but we're not learning critical thinking, and but one good thing, and we a lot of times we characterize politicians because we watch Washington. And that's where all the news coverage is. And people don't really realize what's happening at the State House or in county council. But a lot of those folks that we want to just characterize them all and stereotype them all as they're just out for themselves or whatever. It's all these stereotypes. But what you will find is there are leaders in those groups who really are trying to, advance good policy. Mm-hmm. And so we have successes, and those successes come, maybe one in 20 efforts, but when they do, it is very heartwarming and it is fulfilling to have a success.
So one of the lessons you'd say for those trying to make change at a state level or a county level is to find leadership on those positions within relevant governments?
And to engage even with the people you disagree with, engage with them.
Let me ask you about missteps, about a memory of where your faith and reason came up short.
I've got about 1 million of them, but it's a funny thing you ask that question because just this past week I was talking with a group about communications and how important it is that you try to choose the right words, especially given who you're talking to. Know your audience, know your audience. And I will never forget early in my registered lobbyist days, Mr. McClellan was chairman of the Ways and Means Committee. And I was trying to get this point across about comparing us to other states. For example, South Carolina has 65% of the roads under state maintenance. Georgia only has 16% under state maintenance. So our state has taken on a big responsibility. And I used the word our. I said, so when we're looking at our roads, At that time, I was representing mostly the highway contractors. And he stopped me dead right there and looked at me and he said, what do you mean our roads? They're not your roads. They belong to the people. Well, that's what I meant when I said our roads. I was talking in the, as part of the people. But he took it that I was saying, no, the highway contractors, those are our roads. And I will never forget that. That was, one example.
He's had a bone to pick with you over your choice of pronouns, right? Your possessive pronouns.
Yeah.
Yeah. I really appreciate this. If you've offered a few kind of enduring lessons in terms of persuasion, conflict de-escalation, engaging in the reasonable exchange of ideas. If I could sum up, the summation point seems to me to be know your audience. Is there anything that you would add to that?
Don't just shoot from the hip. If you're going to talk to somebody, you better know what you're talking about. And the other thing is, don't lead them, someone you're trying to bring around, don't lead them down the primrose path. Don't only tell your side. You've got to tell them here's where the pitfalls are, and this is what you're going to be criticized for if you take this position I'm asking you to take.
Michael Covington, thank you so much for being on When We Disagree. When We Disagree is recorded at the College of Charleston with creator and host Michael Lee. Recording and sound engineering by Jesse Kunz and Lance Laidlaw. Reach out to us at whenwedisagree@gmail.com.